Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic.
School year is hot and heavy already. Fighting those buses.
Yep, kids are back at school. Fall weather's coming.
Good stuff.
So today we've got a special guest, Barret Katuna. And Barret is the executive officer at Sociologists for Women in Society. Barret, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. How are you today?
We're about Sociologists for Women in Society. What do they do, and what do you do there?
Sure. So I've been in this role for about 2.5 years now, and I serve as the executive officer, which means that I'm responsible for all the daily affairs of this feminist academic nonprofit organization. We are located in Connecticut, but we have two meetings a year. One is in the summer that we just wrapped up. That was in conjunction with the American Sociological Association meeting in New York City. And then we have one coming up in San Diego in 2020 at the end of January. And so what we do is we bring academics together and non-academics who identify as sociologists, who believe in our feminist mission. And we provide mentoring opportunities, networking opportunities, leadership development, it's a really great space for scholars who are starting out to present their research at our academic conferences. And it's also a space where we provide opportunities for presentations at all levels. So there are junior academics, senior academics. We do international advocacy work. We have a presence at the United Nations each year and participate in the Commission on the Status of Women. So we're really an active organization, and I became involved in it when I was in graduate school, and I'm really privileged now to be leading the organization that really helped me get my start and figure out where I belonged in the academy, which is actually outside of the academy, running this nonprofit.
All right, so for those of us who are not sociologists and don't do research, could you boil down what is the mission of the organization?
Sure. So the mission of the organization is to provide feminist mentoring, a space for publications and dissemination of information. The mission is related to activism. You can read more about it at our organizational website is www.socwomen.org. Our organizational name, as you can tell, obviously it's Sociologists for Women in Society, but at the same time, we're not just for women, we're for gender equality in society. So we focus on issues that the intersex, trans, and non-binary community faces, and that's something that I do address in my book. So we're really a space for we evolved out of the 1969 Women's Caucus at the American Sociological Association meeting, where women were not being respected and our research was not being respected. Women weren't even allowed in some of the same spaces as the men. There were meetings taking place at one of the bars that the Hilton in San Francisco, which is kind of interesting. We're heading back there in 2020 for the summer meeting, but women weren't allowed in the bar, and there were meetings taking place there that they wanted to be a part of, and meetings taking place at various different restaurants where women weren't allowed to go to. So women just got together and said, this is insane. Like, we're starting our own organization, and so we're gearing up for our 50th anniversary that will be celebrated in 2021 because we incorporated in 1971. So we're really about giving scholars a space to grow and kind of figure out where they belong in where they were most comfortable. And so we're really developing our mentoring capacity as well, because we realize that scholars and people outside of the academy who identify as sociologists, who are also applied sociologists, they require and are looking for mentoring all throughout the way of their life. So someone might be a full professor but still looking for a mentor, and someone might be an early stage academic looking for some assistance outside of their own institution. So that's what we really promote, is developing those relationships, and that can oftentimes lead to collaborations in the future on publications.
Yeah, and you just mentioned your book. Barret is an author, and I met Barret when she was a professor over at the University of Connecticut, and we were working with students over there, which was really, really fun. But you and I sit down periodically, and you told me about writing the book, Degendering Leadership in Higher Education. And what it was is you did a series of interviews of a lot of different people. So tell us about your journey there, and tell us about some of the more interesting interviews and how you came up with this. And obviously, before we're done, you have to give us the link to the book. I know it's on Amazon too, but congratulations for launching it, and hopefully things are going well so far. But tell us about the journey.
Sure. Yeah. So the journey that led me there, I actually worked in higher education before coming to the University of Connecticut, and I absolutely loved being at a university. I went to Lehigh University for my undergraduate degree, and then I did a master's degree program there as well, and then just kind of decided that I really loved like the administrative side with admissions and fundraising, and I found myself working for Lehigh University as an associate director of admissions. And I was there at a time when we were welcoming in our first woman president, Dr. Alice Gass. And it was a really interesting time to be on campus, because Lehigh is an institution that was an all men's institution up until 1971. And so here we were, I guess it was probably 2006 or so, when Dr. Gass was coming in as president, the first woman, and she was a very highly esteemed engineering professor. I think she has her PhD from Princeton. She was just very, very world-renowned scholar. And there were some people who were not thrilled with that decision. There were people who were talking about, oh, how are things going to change now that there's a woman running the university? And I just started to really, at that time, I wasn't even enrolled in a PhD program, but I just was really in touch with that conversation and was really paying attention to what people were saying. And then, I found myself, I applied to graduate school, got into UConn. I had really no idea what I was going to do in terms of my dissertation. I wasn't one of those students who knew like on day one exactly what my dissertation project was going to be. I actually studied human rights more so in the earlier stages of my career, and looked at women's organizing for the Nepali Women's Global Network, an organization that I learned about once I was at UConn. But then Dr. Susan Herbst, it was announced that she was going to become the first woman president at UConn. So I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. Here I find myself, I'm at another institution that's experiencing its first woman president. And so, and I started to, again, hear people talking about how things might change with a woman leading the university. And I thought, why are these conversations happening? These women are, like, people were saying, oh, maybe the presidency will be more friendly, or more, she'll just have more open access to her office, and she'll be more motherly than, she'll just be more like soft and friendly perhaps than we've seen in the past. I was just interested in those dialogues. And then at the same time, I started to really hone in on conversations, some that were even happening at UConn, where there was a scholar who came in who was talking to young women primarily about how to lead in a man's world and how to kind of become more masculine in order to succeed. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really not, there's something going on here. There's something wrong with that messaging. I think we need to be telling future leaders, women, men, non-binary, intersex, trans, we need to be just talking about leading with a good, solid ethical foundation. not leading in a masculine or a feminine way, because those are it's very problematic when we're utilizing those terms, because it creates these binary categories that people have to somehow find themselves in, define themselves into those categories. And so as a gender scholar, I started to problematize that, and so that became the basis of my research, was examining these questions of how the role that gender plays in the narratives of women and men leaders, how might leaders' gendering of leadership reproduce gender stereotypes, and then the strategies that leaders and institutions of higher education might use to degender leadership. And so ultimately, the focus of the book is to figure out like what might degendered leadership look like, and to kind of get rid of these paradigms that are very, very, very problematic. So I set out to do interviews. I interviewed 34 women and men who served as presidents, deans, and provosts at institutions throughout the United States. It was an incredibly rewarding experience, getting access to some of the most highly esteemed leaders in the country. And they respected my project, given that some of them had done qualitative interviews for their dissertations in the past, and really gave me a lot of wonderful feedback. But I think something that really sticks with me from the interviews is that, gender, it's definitely a salient factor in how someone's experience, and the chitter chatter that a woman might encounter that might be sexist in nature when she's first on the job, but then how, as one evolves in one's career, sometimes then gender means less to some of the women. This is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but makes complete sense. Some of the women who were nearing the end of their careers, in their late 50s, early 60s even, were saying, now that I'm older, it doesn't matter as much. People know not to make those comments anymore. So it definitely it matters if someone is how gender matters in terms of how someone experiences the social world, and how we're socialized from the beginning of our lives. We're socialized, before we're even born. Our parents are gendering us and having gender reveal parties, even though gender is a social construction. But it doesn't mean that you have to lead in a certain way if you happen to be a woman or a man. And the people I interviewed were no one identified as intersex or non-binary or trans, but the point of the book is that, moving forward to a situation where we're going to see more people leading from this community of the non-binary community, we need to be prepared to not speak about gender in these binary contexts, because it's very, could be very, very, very problematic.
Yeah, you talk about eliminating the non-binary form of gender. But isn't it true? Gender itself is simply a matter of genetics and reproduction. It's all of these other characteristics that society has sort of dumped on them that's really more fluid, isn't it?
So yeah, so sociologists talk about like sex as a you're born with a sex, whether intersex, whether it's male or female. But then society tells boys, like, oh, you should want to wear blue.
Right.
You shouldn't want to wear the butterfly or have a unicorn birthday party. But it's fine. A little boy can love unicorns and love to wear butterflies, and that's okay. It's society that is telling the little boy, like, you shouldn't like that. That's not okay. Those toys are for girls. Those toys are for boys. But so yeah. To get back to your point, yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's we're actually putting these, I don't want to say negative, but I guess these non-constructive ideas onto children of both genders. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the gender they are. It's just our preconceptions, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
So you've talked a lot about your work, but got you interested in sociology in the first place?
I guess, there was someone at Lehigh who I met, Dr. Jackie Crassus, who was a professor of sociology at the time, and I got to know her through work and learn more about her research, and then just started to explore sociology and how, um, it's looking at a lot of the problems in society and looking at, how can we address these and how can we make the world a better place if we focus on these inequalities, and how can we do something impactful through our research and our activism. And it's kind of funny because I never took intro to sociology as an undergrad, and I found myself teaching intro to sociology as I was the TA for it, and I felt a little bit out of place at the beginning because I hadn't ever taken it. I was never in those shoes of those undergrads. I majored in French and political science as an undergrad, but was more drawn to sociology as time went on, given that like women's studies homes oftentimes are there's a lot of interdisciplinarity between sociology and women's studies, but then there are women's and gender studies scholars who are from all disciplines. So I looked at UConn, and there were a few individuals there, Dr. Bonzana Perkayasa, Dr. Davida Silfen Glassberg, who really were major contributing factors to why I wanted to go to UConn and explore sociology. And I felt like that was I kind of got a little bit jaded just by the political context of the world we live in, and felt like I really want to be in another space to study these inequalities in society. And I felt like the program at UConn, the gender scholars who are there are just phenomenal. They're, I think, maybe 5 past presidents of the organization I lead who are all there. And if you go to any academic conference and you talk about some of these people, they're just like, they're starstruck that you've worked with them. So UConn really is a phenomenal place to study gender and sociology.
Chip, do you have anything you want to ask?
I'm just enjoying listening to this. I mean, it's if you closing in looking at what Amazon is saying, it says this book is a tool for promoting leadership diversity. And I know that that's what we're all striving towards. We're trying to eliminate all kinds of different stereotypes out there, because more and more these days, in the days of social media and everything else, everybody is a critic and they can just write stuff down without even having to face up to different things. So we're just super critical and pointing out everything that's wrong with everything out there. Um, what did you find right that's going on right now, Barret? I know that you've had some very, very interesting interviews, and some of them you said were pretty amazing. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
sense we're moving in the right direction in a lot of ways. And, with my title, Happiness and Success GPS, that's what I preach. And I'd love to hear a lot more about that in podcasts and everything else. So where are we heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that when the organization started out, women weren't even allowed in some of the meeting places. I hope you can tell us we've made progress.
Yes, definitely. We have made progress for sure. But I think any organization though, there are always new challenges. Like now there are microaggressions in every organization where people feel uncomfortable or are made to feel uncomfortable because of their race or their sexuality or because of their gender identity. So I definitely think that while we've come a far way, there's always something, we like when I was writing the book or when I was writing my dissertation, for example, I didn't really have a whole lot to say in terms of the trans, non-binary, intersex community. There wasn't really a part of it. But as time has come on, I realized like this is a part of that larger conversation, and I need to address that. And I also address it. There's a limitation in my research because I did not interview anyone who's from that community. They're all men or women. One person identified as part of the LGBTQ community, but beyond that, it was a very heteronormative community. It was for the most part, there wasn't a ton of diversity in terms of race, and but we're going to see that as the diversity coming as time goes on. So I feel like this is a tool for promoting leadership diversity, because we it's not okay to say like, oh, this person is from that community, so that means they're going to lead like this is how we're going to expect them to lead. And so when a woman comes into a new position and she's very assertive, people might be shocked. Oh, I thought she was going to be more maternal. Well, let's just forget about that and just look at a man and a woman, an intersex individual, just with like an open kind of without these preconceptions, right? So I mean, yes, we are going in the right direction, I think, but just little things like when Hillary Clinton was running for president, there were a lot of jabs about what she was wearing. And I mean, there are still, if you look at comedians or just it's kind of sad to people commenting on her pantsuits or it's like, why are we talking about those things like that? To me, and we're still talking about that oftentimes when we see women running for office. And and I think that's why this book, it does have generalizability to a larger population. I mean, I looked at academic leadership, which is, I chose to look at academic leadership largely because that's where I was situated and had the access to, but also because we are seeing more gender diversity in academic leadership than we are seeing in other contexts. So I felt like this is a place for us to learn. And the men that I interviewed, many of them identified situations in which they felt like people were treating their women colleagues improperly and making comments that were jabs at them, calling the women like a woman who was president, oh, she's being a queen because this is how she wants things to go. But at the same time, it's like, no, she's doing her job, so she has the authority to do that. So get over it, So it's just and I mean, and it was just interesting to see. I mean, and these were academics. They had been exposed to gender diversity and diversity training, more so than I would imagine that someone running for office randomly would have been, would be in larger society. So, I mean, I think that this is a model for the future for us to look at. Like, this is the way that things are, they're not perfect, and women are definitely experiencing gender discrimination still in academia. I'm not saying they're not. This is just showing how, when we're talking about leadership, we can define it without relying on these binary, socially constructed categories, and that effective academic leadership is not masculine or feminine. Effective academic leadership it is what it is. It's not. We don't have to think of it in this, that a man can do it better than a woman, or a woman can do it better than a man can. It's not. We can't look at it like that. It's not progressive to be doing it like that, to have that outlook.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. We've talked a lot about gender diversity, but your work really does focus a lot on leadership. What lessons have you found about leadership that can benefit both men and women?
So the lessons that I've learned about leadership largely are, we can all benefit from trainings. That there are oftentimes trainings that are focused towards women's leadership trainings, but thinking about trainings more so as networking opportunities to figure out, what did this leader do, and how can I learn from what that leader did, and maybe they did something wrong, and so I can learn to do the opposite of what that leader did. So I think that effective academic leadership is oftentimes like learning on the job. I think that there's no leadership guide. And I think that what we can all take away from it is that if you're interested in becoming a leader, it's important to talk to as many leaders as you can, to network as much as you can, and not to think like, oh, well, I'm not good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or whatever it might happen to be. But it's really about growing your network. And I continue to do that now as a leader of my organization. Just today, someone friended me on LinkedIn, and then another person popped up who is an executive officer for another organization very similar to mine, who I never even knew existed. And so I friended him, saying, we should connect, And so I think it's learning that we all make mistakes, but we have to learn from those mistakes. And you're not going to, no training is going to, make you the best leader in the world. You have to just surround yourself by positive energy, and, and that I think will be, the key to doing things right in the future. Yeah, I think that's a key takeaway. Someone said, like, learning how to, or eating the noodles. Like, someone wrote that, or someone said that as a quote, which I think one of the sections of my book is that you have to eat the noodles before you can really succeed. You have to be in the trenches and get through some hard times. There's nothing that's going to prepare. I mean, there was one leader, I think he was president of a private institution, and he said that there's nothing that prepares you for making a phone call to a parent who's lost a child in one of your dormitories because of X, Y, and Z. There's nothing that you just have to kind of rely on yourself to make the right choices in language, and maybe pick up the phone and call someone who's in a similar institution. And something else that was kind of interesting that came out in the data was leaders saying, once I became president, or once I was outgoing at this institution, I realized that I only should go back when invited, or if there's a funeral for someone, or I know, or something. Like, you can't like linger and try to still like assert your authority as an outgoing president of an institution. You kind of have to take, understand that your time is over now. It's someone else is in there. So that was kind of interesting too, I think, because I don't, and I'm not sure. I mean, every institution is different in terms of how that might play out, but I can imagine it can be hard for certain people to completely sign off from their duties.
I'm sure. All right, we're coming up on the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
Well, I love the title, Degendering Leadership in Higher Education. I mean, the start to making progress in anything is a general awareness in the first place that we have a problem. And one of the comments in the book review says this important book creates a path for inspired, talented, and qualified leadership that is not reduced to gender norms and stereotypes. And I think, I mean, you mentioned that people who are closer to my age are getting this a whole lot better now, Barret, but I also have a lot of faith in the younger generation growing up, because their principles and the things that they're growing up with now, we are all a lot more one world minded with our children than we ever were when Eric and I were growing up. And so I'm so happy that you've published this book. It's bringing this to the forefront, and I think it's going to make a big difference, especially in a lot of younger people growing up, to give them the opportunity. So kudos to you, and it's been great to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we go, if our listeners want to get more information about the Sociologists for Women organization or your book, where can they go?
So the organizational website is www.sociwomen.org, sociwomen.org. And for the book, you can go to the Emerald bookstore. It's published by Emerald Publishing Limited, which is based in the United Kingdom. And you can also find it on Amazon. So that's actually where I got my copy. I'm still waiting for the rest of them to come from the UK. So, but it feels really good to have one in my hands. So I've been waiting a long time.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, the iTunes Store, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.